Thank you for having me on. This is wonderful. And I'm Sarah Blanchard, and I live in northeastern Connecticut in the US, and have lived here a number of years. It's a quiet town, rural area, which informs a lot of the writing that I do. Mostly I just like to write, and I've been a writer all my life. And again, all of that comes through in my writing. I like to write about those things and the people who live in the areas here. I've done a lot of other things as well. If you live long enough, you get to do lots and lots of things. So I won't bore you with all of that, but it'll come up, I think, as we talk about the books.
The
Mhm.
dual timeline is so integral to your novel, Grabtown. And
Mhm.
you said previously you found an old manuscript that you kind of readapted to craft into the
Yes,
Grabtown.
right.
Did you ever play with the idea of writing chronologically rather than with your dual timeline? And how do you think that would have changed the story?
That's one question that I haven't been asked before. I think it's integral to the story to have that dual timeline and to merge the two together, the present day story and the 1985 story. Partly because the present day story contains its own element of conflict between two sisters, twins, who should be close but aren't. And reading that old story that features their mother in it and was written by mom's best friend, and I'll try not to go into spoilers here, but uh, the process of reading and processing that story for the present day twins is very important to how they manage to work their way back toward each other
Mm.
and have to solve very large problems of their own in the present day. So discovering their mother's history before them, before they were born, is a key element of the story. And that discovery doesn't get dumped in your lap all at once. It needs to come in piecemeal, kind of seeping in around the edges, and needs a bit of processing piece by piece because it's big. It's
Mm.
big, and their mother turns out to be somebody completely different than what they knew her as they were growing up. So that kind of you don't want to dump everything on the reader all at once, and that's sort of what would have happened if I had put the story chronologically, so that you knew the whole backstory, the whole history first, and then you'd move into the present time. And I really don't think that would have worked all that well. I really didn't consider doing it that way. It was fun trying to merge the two together so I didn't lose the reader. That's
Yeah.
always the challenge with a dual timeline story.
Mm.
And I've never had a reader tell me they got lost. So I think it's been fairly effective.
How much of a line level style comes from revision versus instinct in the first draft? So when you're editing, are you more likely to cut sentences for clarity or for rhythm? I suppose a little bit more interesting as well as you had written it, some of it so long ago, parked it and come back to it as well. So could have been a lot of editing.
When I first found the 35-year-old manuscript of a novel that I had at the time had thought was polished and finished, and I actually had it in the hands of an agent back then, and it was shopped around. It almost did get traditionally published back then. And
Interesting.
I read that now and I just cringe because my writing understanding of the craft and experiences, you grow a lot. I hope you grow a lot in 35 years.
Mm.
So it was kind of embarrassing for me to read it, but at the same time, I recognized some elements in there that were quite good. Character description holds up well. A lot of the dialogue, which was true, of course, to that time period, is quite solid, and the themes are still there. So I wanted to save all of that. I did rip out a lot of it, and I did a huge amount of line editing there for tone, for consistency and tone. But I wanted the voice of AJ, the narrator from 85, to be very distinct. And she's a reporter, so her voice is going to be that reporter's style of speaking. It's first person
Mm.
and very different from the contemporary story, which is done in third person, because now you're looking at two sisters who are different people in a different time period. And I think that that lends itself also to not losing the reader between one time period and the other.
Definitely.
As far as the editing goes, I try to be a plotter first and a pantser second, and I tend to fail. So I find myself doing what I tell my writing students not to do. Don't try to write and edit at the same time. I
Yeah.
write, get stuff down, and then I tend to go back before the whole story is finished and start doing some edits for tone, clarity. And I won't do the actual line by line editing until the very end. But I find myself cutting, and then expanding for clarity or for detail. So that's essentially the way I went at it. And the old manuscript, probably 30% of it made it into the
Okay.
finished story. I had a very good advice from the one developmental editor that I had hired. She said, don't throw anything away. Do not murder your darlings. Don't kill them off. Rehome them.
Yeah.
So whatever you delete, you don't really delete. You set it aside, put it in a slush pile somewhere. You might want to come back to it because that was the perfect way to describe something, you realize later. Or you might, as I did I referenced 10 pages that weren't necessary regarding a schnauzer in my first novel. The schnauzer's still in there, but I took out the 10 extra pages that didn't move the story forward. And I
Yeah.
turned part of that into a poem because I write poetry also. So
Oh,
I have this
nice.
wonderful little poem about a schnauzer. And when I do it at poetry readings, people love it. So the schnauzer found a new home, literally.
The narrative's flipped and it is set in the small town, and the small town completely becomes a character in and of itself as well.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think what does the small town setting allow you to explore, whether narratively or emotionally as well, that a larger city wouldn't necessarily?
I think there are a number of aspects to that. First, the geography defines, I think in a lot of ways, the geography that we grow up in, that we live in, defines the decisions that we make and who we become. And if you spend a good deal of time in an area where um, you have fewer than 100,000 people living in 400 square miles, which is the case here in northeastern Connecticut, you have enough people to provide the services you need, but they're all at least 12 miles away. So you get to be very resourceful. You make decisions daily on whether I really need to go to the store today to get that
Mm,
gallon of milk, or can it wait 3 days until I have a longer shopping list. So you're making those decisions all the time. You know there are people around who can help you, but they don't have to be all up in your business all the time. They will be there if you need them, and you will be there for them if they need you, but they're not hanging over the fence talking to you every morning and checking up on you every morning. So it's a unique group, I think, of it's kind of a unique combination of excellent neighbors, if you go choose them and find them, people who know everything about you from kindergarten forward. They knew you when you were 5 years old, but they also know you now because you're still here and now you're part
mm,
of the community. And I think in the book we say that one of the characters says in Grabtown, small towns are great at scolding the kids who throw too many snowballs because that's visible, but not so good at finding real evil or the really bad stuff that can happen. There
mm,
can be a live and let live attitude about living in the country because there is space. You can get away from the person you don't like who talks too much or drinks too much, or you, unless you're a kid and you're stuck in that household, you can actually just not be present for that. At the same time as developing that independence, it also can develop that isolation.
mm.
You can be a hermit if you want to be a hermit, and you can do things that other people never know about if you want to do that. So there's that as well. And as long as you're not bothering anyone, causing any damage that people can actually see, then they'll probably leave you alone.
Mm.
So there's that as well. In the 400 square miles that I referenced for this part of Connecticut, we have only 42 police officers.
Wow.
That's a ridiculously large amount of space that those people have to police. You get to be very resilient. You get to be very independent, very
Mm.
resilient. You're more likely to rely on your neighbors than on just calling the police if it's not really police worthy. That goes back to the decision making process. There's that kind of independence, resourcefulness, and then it's easy to turn away from something that might be really bad happening.
It's the kind of the like false dichotomy of being safer in a small town, but actually maybe you're just not exposed to certain things in order to be able to recognize something as what it truly is. And I wonder
Right.
also if there's an element of like small town pride in that if,
Yes.
there
Oh,
was so and so who might be doing something questionable over there, but actually if we just sweep it under the rug and focus on all the nice members of the community, then the evil perhaps isn't happening really.
you certainly have plenty of those folks out there. Yes. Well, and one example of that was something I kind of briefly thought of working into the storyline somewhere and then decided not to.
Mm.
Right around the same time in 1985, there was a serial killer here
Oh
in
wow.
Eastern Connecticut, a fellow named Michael Ross. I believe he was the last or one of the last to be executed in the state of Connecticut,
Oh
which now
gosh.
does not have the death penalty. But at the time, he grew up on a chicken farm, just less than 15 miles away from where I was living at the time. And he had kidnapped, raped, killed, I think it's a total of nine young women that he had actually confessed to in 3 states because we're very close to Rhode Island, so
Of
Connecticut,
course.
Rhode Island. But then he'd also been at college in Upper New York State, and it turned out that he had raped and killed up there as well. And it had everybody on edge, of
Mm.
course, while he was out there still at large. When he was caught and captured and arrested for this, it was just a, oh my God, I knew the family. I went to school with him. How could that have happened? And yeah, that family had some problems, but really, and people were just in disbelief.
Mm.
And you have to wonder how many other people might have people who grow up in difficult circumstances in a troubled family, but don't turn toward that dark side and don't cause the terrible tragedies that this fellow had done.
I think last little element really, but just still on the small town thing, because it was so interesting to me, particularly the character of the police officer who is in both our timelines.
Right.
And it's a funny one because he's at the heart of it, he's trying to uncover the mystery, but he's not really trying to any longer uncover the mystery to kind of close the case or to, stamp that as done and finished. It's more just he genuinely feels like he does actually just want justice and to kind of make sure that it's wrapped up for the individuals rather than close the case. I think it's again that's kind of polarized from the idea of maybe organized crime and like that internal corruption that might be allowed to run wild in a small
Mhm.
town. Um,
Right. I enjoyed writing about him because he wasn't a very major character in the
mm,
old story, but I sat thinking, who would come back? I needed somebody to come back in the present day as well. And who would do that? So he's the obvious one to come
yeah.
back. He was the right age in the old story to be retired, but still be around. And he had the right kind of character where he's going to be the dogged pursuer. He really wants to know. He suspects, he can't prove it. Um, and then he realizes in the background, which we don't realize, right off the bat, he knows more about the larger picture. And so he's going to perhaps serve also as keeping an eye
Mm.
on the family to make sure that that nothing untoward, nothing worse, terrible or worse is happening now.
Yeah.
So he's very much aware of the generational aspect of crime, where it can be inherited, and it can be just that background of this is normal for this family to engage in this kind of behavior, and they indoctrinate the next generation early. And where are they now? So he has that larger picture, and I wanted to pull that in more. So I made him a much more central character. Not that he's in every scene, but he comes back. He has information that he's not really going to share much of, but he's going to be there and keep an eye on things.
When reading Grabtown, I found many of the themes reminiscent of Gillian Flynn, Stephen King books, not the supernatural stuff, but kind of the small town East Coast all relates. Were you inspired by any authors in particular, and what authors do you read, whether that's for, research purposes or just for relaxing?
Two of my favorite authors are Gillian Flynn and Stephen King. So there you go. You hit them right on the head right there. And my writing's been compared to both of them, actually, by one critic. So and I'm very honored to have that reference. There are a lot of writers that I like. I go back often. If you go back far enough, I think one of the best writers for developing a strong narrative and moving the story forward in an economical way is Dick Francis. So all of his novels from way back in the 60s, I enjoyed those tremendously, 60s, 70s. And those really shaped the way I thought a story narrative should move, should flow. So influenced by him. I love Anne Cleeves right now. And Elizabeth George, a lot of the British mysteries. And also Amy Tintera, Liz Moore right now. And then if you want to go darker, Joyce Carol Oates. I've been a Joyce Carol Oates fan for decades, going way back to her short story days, early stuff that she had done that just turned the world upside down as to what actually good literature can be in terms of containing elements of horror and tragedy and not having a happy ending at the end of the story. And of course, she's in her upper 70s or 80s, and is still coming out with novels. She came out with another one this year. So on the horror side, I learned to appreciate really good horror. So Ramsey Campbell is not only a fan. I'm not only a fan of his. I actually know Ramsey. And Dennis Etchison, who is highly underrated. He's passed on now, but highly underrated horror writer, just a brilliant writer that I was friends with. My former husband had been in high school with Dennis, so we got introduced to Dennis, played poker with Dennis, and he introduced us to Ramsey Campbell when Ramsey made a trip to Cape Cod for a book that he was researching, and ended up going to the horror writers convention in Connecticut the year it was there, and had a marvelous time. So those are two writers on the horror side. Of course, Stephen King is horror / mystery / everything. And another writer that I really like now is getting out of the horror genre is Percival Everett. And his book, James. And if anyone has not read that, they absolutely must. A retelling of Huckleberry Finn from the enslaved man, the escaped enslaved man, Jim's perspective. And that is just an amazing story. And we say, oh, well, that's not horror, that's great literature. But I was at a talk that Percival Everett had given about his book, and he said one reader had come up to him and said, "Why do you have to have so much violence in that book at the end?" And he looked at her and he said, "Have you read the book, ma'am? The whole book is violent." And I thought, okay, there we go. It's the horror of the time of slavery. And it's prevalent, it's there on every page. and it's not that I revel in writing about the dark stuff. I want to know how people handle the dark stuff. I want to know what decisions my characters are going to make when they're confronted with the really bad stuff, the really serious things, how they manage to cope with it, how they inform themselves to move forward, and how they incorporate that into their futures, their lives, their next part of their lives. That to me has always been really fascinating.
Are there any questions that you wish interviewers would ask you about Grabtown or your writing generally, but rarely do, or have totally failed to ask yet?
I think one of the questions that I'd love to hear from people, one person has asked me this, what did you learn about yourself while you were writing the story?
Interesting.
And I have been asked that question once. So that's a very different question. It kind of ties into what inspired you to write the story, because that's connected to it. But in this case, it's particularly pertinent to say to me, what did you learn while writing the story? Because there's two different stories in here in Grabtown. And what I learned is I'm a much better writer now than I was 35 years ago. That's thing number one. But the other things that I've learned is a little bit more about who I was back in 1985 and how the core values and the core interest in what I want to say in my writing is still the same. It's very solid. The themes that I'm dealing with, present day story, 1985 story, are tied together, and they're essentially the same. We're looking at fractured sisterhood trying to heal. We're looking at ultimately justice. Every mystery story, every thriller deals with justice, whether justice is acquired, achieved, or not. It deals with justice. That's at the core of all of those stories. But I also wanted to tackle some of the societal issues, what it is that allows things like the normalization of abuse of children or women, those who are vulnerable, who takes advantage of them. That has not changed, but it has expanded, I guess, with the internet, with social media, with so much being easier to communicate than it was in 1985. The same damage can occur, but more rapidly. The same tragedies can occur, but they tend to be bigger and international or just larger in nature overall. So it's not necessarily a nostalgia for the old days, because the old days were certainly not better than the days we're living in now, but they were different. And the dangers that we run into now as a society, as a small village, as a country, as a world, happen more rapidly, and they tend to have a bigger impact across a larger stage than they did in 1985. And that demands a larger response from those of us who are trying to make the world a better place. So it requires us to be, I think, now more vigilant than we had to be in 1985. Although the story I've written shows that you had to be vigilant back then too, and not everybody managed to do a good job of it. But that's the kind of way that writing that story has what that's brought me to, and how the story now informs who I am. And of course, there's other aspects to it. I did a lot of research for this. I really wanted to understand police procedural work a little bit better, even though it's not at the core of the story. I wanted to get the details right. Grabtown is going to be coming out as an audiobook in a few months. And I'm also working on a Spanish edition as well. So I'm trying to reach as wide an audience as possible. And I would just, I'm a big supporter of indie bookstores. And I do a lot of a lot of appearances and work with libraries. So we have a wonderful organization in the US called Sisters in Crime. So I want to put in a plug for Sisters in Crime.
Definitely.
Sisters in Crime is an organization of writers who do crime novels. And we also go into libraries and hold panel discussions on how to write a mystery novel and get people involved in the writing craft as well. If anybody asks me for advice on writing, I'm always going to say join a writers group, group of people that can inspire you and help you and support you and not beat you down over the Oxford comma or anything else, but really be supportive in your writing journey, because that's where you hold yourself accountable to keep writing. And that helps me a lot. I'm a member of several writers groups, poetry groups. I like writing across the genre as well. So it all informs the journey. I'm working on my third novel, and it's going to be another thriller. It's going to be another murder, more of a classic murder mystery, I think. And it's going to feature an astronomer and a ventriloquist. So we're going to do a whole lot of research. Now, I understand the astronomy part. I actually worked for 2 years in Hilo, Hawaii at Gemini North Observatory as a facilities administrator, not an astronomer.
Still.
But my husband and I are both amateur astronomers, and so I've worked more of that into the next one coming up. And it's going to involve a research trip to a small planetarium up in Vermont, the Fairbanks Museum and Planetarium. And it's going to involve a whole lot of research on ventriloquism, because that is not a field I've ever poked a finger into. So
interesting.
We're going to learn ventriloquism. Yes.
Yeah. Amazing. And do you have editor friends and other people who also have experience with ventriloquism and astronomy that you can reach out to for help? Any
astronomy
beta readers?
That's a good one. That's an easy one for us. We still have many friends from Gemini. Ventriloquism, I'm going to say not yet, but I know the University of Connecticut, part of their theater arts program is puppetry.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to go locate a ventriloquist.
Oh, that's great that it's even what the plot you kind of settle on, the things you work, the things you need to research creates a whole new community that you now need to go and explore and have these conversations with people. It's amazing.
Yep. That's what it's all about. You can't do it in a vacuum. So much of writing is staring at a screen or sitting there with a pen and a piece of paper, nobody else around. You don't want other people around. And if you don't balance that with discussions and interaction and conversation with good, interesting people, it shrivels. I think it just shrinks down to its own little nugget that doesn't go anywhere. So I think it's got to be the peace and quiet and solitude when you're really getting the ideas on paper, and then go out into the world and add more, inform more.
Amazing. Thank you very much. That was great.